Okay, good morning, everyone. Well, let me start with saying that I am honored and grateful that I got invited to give this presentation. And I used it as an opportunity to reflect on what were two themes which the organizers articulated for this meeting. So the basic message of my presentation is how we can interrelate ideas about new educational designs, which they call for papers. The framing of the conference that we want to have. What I said so far is that I wanted to thank the organizers for inviting me to give this presentation. And I tried to relate and reflect upon how can I say something which is relevant to this conference. And if you studied the call or the description of the proposal, there were, or for the conference, there were two aspects that they would like to have papers having visionary new educational design. Now I'm very cautious how visionary my ideas are, so I put this in parentheses. And the second thing was, this was sort of the theme of this year's conference, data-driven approaches in digital education. So the basic message which I want to convey with my remarks is how to interrelate these two things and base this on my ideas, my understanding what these topics might be. So I will say, talk about principles for new educational designs, talk a little bit about a concept which I call the age of dataism, and then reason about what could be the opportunities as well as the pitfalls as we are engaging in this age of dataism, and then come to a conclusion. So, having a center of lifelong learning and design, we have thought about new educational designs as they relate to lifelong learning. And I also was a faculty member where I tried to combine the research which I did with my activities being a teacher. So these are some principles which I want to elaborate more, but first to give sort of a summary statement. So the first one is to say, what would it mean that people have the experience that they don't have to learn, but they want to learn? And I regarded this as sort of one kind of element of my whole career to reflect, can I make a positive contribution that we move a little bit to want to learn? So I come from Boulder. Some of you may know where that is. So Colorado is a big ski country. So here is a conceptual experiment. I asked 1,000 students in Boulder, do you have to go skiing or do you want to go skiing? And then I asked the same 1,000 students, do you have to go to class or do you want to go to class? And even I haven't done this experiment at this large scale, I can tell you when I did this informally that there's a little bit more want-to voices going skiing. So why do we as academics cannot sort of exploit this and also say, yeah, people want to come to classes, want to be involved in research. And over the years, we have studied Lego construction kits, where Lego lives basically economically from that people want to build Lego models. We have closely worked with the people from who do Scratch, which is a development at MIT, which has a worldwide movement where people also do this because they want to do it. Just out of curiosity and maybe to wake you up, at least raise your hand. Who has seen the movie October Sky? So it's a very interesting movie where, and it's based on a real story, where some youngsters in West Virginia see the Sputnik in the late 50s from the Soviet Union, and the people are out and see the Sputnik coming along, and then they build a rocket. And the whole movie shows what efforts they put into and how much they then go to their teachers, go to people who help them to build it mechanically. So if you are interested in how passion in self-directed learning is illustrated with a particular example, you may want to watch this movie. And there is a Wikipedia entry about it. And then particularly one colleague of mine worked over many years with destination imagination, which I think may exist in different countries, where people get together and, try to build interesting things. They pursue interesting ideas, and you sort of encounter very similar principles like we teach in classrooms. This I could elaborate, but I don't want to go too much into it. I think an interesting question is, if we honor and promote these individual interests and passion, you end up with sort of a long-tail distribution. And that means there are an infinite number of topics. And many people then, when you make this argument, say, well, but how do you make sure that the basic skills, like STEM disciplines, the people learn? And our argument is that we can build relationships out of these passions. Mathematical topics, physics principles emerge. And if people encounter those coming from their particular area of interest, they would have a totally different relationship than if someone says, look, mathematics should be important for you, and the student has no idea why this should be the case. So I couldn't sort of resist to include this as why some students want to go to school. This is fairly recent, so as the summer vacation in the United States ended, people have different reasons to go to school. I assume you can read it, what it says. Yes? Good. So the next one is, I think we have operated for a long time that we assumed that there are teachers and learners, and this is a function of a person. So I am a teacher. When I teach a class, the students are the learners. And I think it may provide us with new ideas to say, what would it mean that teacher and learner is a function of a context? So our research was dominated for a long time by a concept which we called symmetry of ignorance. In sources in a very positive way, that we all know certain things and we do not know other things. And for important problems, there are also, this was one of our guiding principles, no experts anymore. So we studied extensively, as a concrete example, Microsoft Word over a long time. And that means the average person knows whatever, 20% of Microsoft Word, and people though know different 20%, but no one knows everything about it. And so how can we exploit this concept of symmetry of ignorance? And when it comes to the latest tricks in programming in Python, the newest development in social media, the students with whom I interact know much more about these things than I do, and I think that's a very good thing. Now, I think a consequence of tying this to a person and why many students believe, the teachers are these people who know everything, is that in an instructionist classroom, the teacher comes to the classroom and she or he talks about things which they have prepared, so they know this. If we would get into more interest-driven settings, where some of the questions would come from the students, I would argue it would become rather quickly obvious that the teacher also doesn't know everything. And so, depending on the topic, we have sort of who has the teacher role and who has the learner role is a question of a context. And I think that's another of the principles which we have explored. Closely related to this is that how we have conceptualized learning, that we focused on settings where the answer is known. And it's known usually by the teacher. So the teacher is a physics teacher and she or he knows this. Our interest has been to explore domains where the answer is not known by anyone and you learn from each other. And I don't want to go into too much. Oh, I forgot one thing. I included this also as a recent event discussed in America. So the little kid says that the teacher never heard of alternative facts, which has become sort of a big thing in America. But returning to learning when the answer is not now. So I don't want to elaborate on this, but here is a quote from Jürgen Engelström that in important transformation of our personal lives and organizational practices, we must learn new forms of activity which are not there yet. So it's not that there's a teacher who covers this. They are literally learned as they are being created. There is no competent teacher. Standard learning theories have little to offer if one wants to understand these processes. And if we take this serious to explore domains where the answer is not known, I think this is a good quote to argue that we have to maybe go beyond the standard learning theories. The next one is that I think, personally believe that a lot of research is done to consider schools and universities as natural or God-given entities. So school is school, and as we think about learning, we have these entities. My argument is we should consider them as social constructs. So if we have no idea, maybe we have to rethink school, not necessarily eliminate school, but to rethink what is the real value of school today as it was compared to maybe 100 years ago, and what will it be in the future. And the last thing, which also has played a big role in my own understanding, was that teaching and learning are not inherently linked. That there's a lot of learning without teaching. And people have access to immense information resources. And what occupied my mind a lot, to avoid failing on the next line, that there is a lot of teaching without learning. And I have done mini experiments, so I fight like just with this presentation, should I exclude a few slides or do I really have to keep them? So I did this mini experiment a number of times. I showed students in an early part of a class slides. And then 2 months later, I showed them exactly the same slides, and basically nobody remembered that they had seen those before. So the question is, maybe that less in some way is more than that we think that we cannot leave one or the other slide out? Or what is the purpose of teaching when 2 months later the students don't know anything anymore what was said earlier? So here is a little bit an elaboration of this. One article vision which I found particularly interesting to think about this learning without teaching is an article which Ivan Illich has in his book about deschooling society, where he talks about learning webs. And what I find amazing about this article is that it was written in 1971. So Illich envisioned a structure which is now supported by technological substrates. At that time, it didn't exist. But I think if you are interested in ideas how learning without teaching could become a more viable thing, take a look at this article. Now speaking, linking it a little bit to data, and I will return to this later on, the question for me was, how do I evaluate myself that I teach without learning? And what kind of data would help me to understand potential failures or shortcomings and give me indications how to improve it? And as I said, I will return to this a little bit later. As I'm not a young graduate student or PhD anymore, I have followed sort of the developments of how technology entered the picture for education and for learning. And this is a very global differentiation, but I think it's a differentiation which was carried through for many decades. And the first orientation is basically theoretically goes back to Skinner and behaviorism. Intelligent tutoring system would be one example. And then basically the nature of this are instructionist approaches. They rely on that the answer is known, that the teacher knows the answer, knows the material. Then an alternative in this community, in the meetings which I attended so far, were these ideas were discussed. So going back to Dewey, inquiry-based learning, where you then have maybe design environments, different programming environments, like Scratch would fit into this. A colleague of mine developed agent sheets, and this leads to more constructionist approaches. To give a little bit more detail, so the theoretical aspects of behaviorism or inquiry go back to these people, so quite some time. And when in the 1970s, the idea came up, now we have computers, how should we use them for learning and teaching? The instructionist people sort of had the assumption the computer is a teacher. And programmed instruction was further developed into much more sophisticated way, into computer-assisted instruction, intelligent tutoring system. I was actually, and I did my PhD and later work, I was sort of in the yellow camp, where in some ways the idea was the learner is the teacher of the computer. And you teach the computer by programming something. And then your program doesn't run. And now you try to analyze why did you fail to teach the computer to do something. And I was involved, if that tells you something, with the logo movement, spent time at MIT, where this was one of the focal points, using it from this perspective. Then a slogan well known in the United States is in the instructionist paradigm, the teacher is the sage on the stage. In the other environment, the teacher is the guide on the side. And I think people who are in the instructionist camp, there's a lot of worries about curricula, what are basic skills, what is cultural literacy, whereas in the other camp, people think about interest-driven discovery learning and these niches which I indicated earlier. MOOCs, a fairly recent development, I would group into this camp. Even the people who do research on MOOCs are aware that they want to enrich maybe MOOCs with elements of the other side. And here you think about interesting materials, interesting objects to think with, strategies to combine this. And the last point is, I think a lot of evaluation aspects in the instructionist camp, we think about tests. And we have sort of PISA-like studies where we have standard things on which we test people coming from different countries. So you apply the same metric. In the other camp, there are interesting projects and people pursue different ideas. And you actually want to have somewhat much more individual metrics of honoring that they came up with interesting ideas. And so this again, if we think about evaluation, raises interesting issues. Now, especially over the last few years, there have been numerous developments, how can we enrich digital education? And I worked for sometimes with people working on MOOCs, and so this is sort of one development where you have open online learning environments, then you have open online courses, so the course is retained as an organizing structure, and it got pioneered by the Open University. There is now the Khan Academy, there are MOOCs, and then you have also more open educational resources like Wikipedia, TED Talks, YouTube, where there is no structure of a course superimposed. Who does not know what clickers are? Who uses clickers? So in Boulder, we have a physicist who won the Nobel Prize. And after he won the Nobel Prize, he said, I will dedicate the rest of my life to revolutionize physics education. And he used clickers extensively. This is a picture of his classroom. And I interacted with him, witnessed how he used it. And well, if you have a Nobel Prize, this, maybe the rest of the university pays a little bit more attention to you. So clickers are a big topic at our university because he was using it. And I mean, you see here a pretty large classroom, and I think this is another technological enhancement where you can get data which allows you to get immediate feedback. I explain a concept, have the people really understood it? What we did, this is a picture sort of from the problems in the learning environments which we worked on. We called this the Envisionment and Discovery Collaboratory. We were pursuing design problems where no one knew the answer. What you see, the horizontal table is basically a computer, and people gather around the table. They come to the table with the symmetry of ignorance. And the problem-solving metaphor was to support reflection in action. So people acted here. Other people could see what they did. They created externalization. And then for a particular topic, there was this vertical board where they could where more information was available about a particular topic. And then these were open environments that as the people worked with it, they also could extend it with information which was not there before. So far I have given you sort of my ideas about what I think are interesting themes to pursue, themes with no final answer, and you may say, well, that's all good, but I have very different ideas, and that's good that we have different ideas. So now I want to link this a little bit more with data-driven approaches. And there was an article by a famous New York Times columnist, which then was not only the article, but there were many follow articles relating to what he said. And he said, we live in the age of dataism. And what he said, how he defined it, or he said it's an obsession with data that assumes a number of things about data, including that it is the best overall measure of any given scenario, and that it always produces valuable results. So he wasn't against, saying data is wrong. I think what he was then elaborating on that it's an overall measure for any given scenario, and that it always produces valuable results. So why do people talk about dataism now? Well, we have technological changes. We have more digital storage. We have smartphones with GPS and timestamps. And if you look at MOOCs, the first symposium which I attended was an NSF-supported meeting when MOOCs came up. And it was sort of under the title, MOOCs and Learning Analytics, a Successful Marriage. Because people doing MOOCs, everything happens inside the computational environment. So you can track what people are doing. And so this is why I think dataism is now an important topic. We may say, how does it relate to learning analytics, which is a big topic here, but then maybe a bigger topic is big data and data science. And if you feel that you are competent in this area, basically every American university hires people in this area. If you go to MOOCs offering from Coursera or edX, I would say courses offered with respect to big data and data science are clearly their current target, which they offer in large quantities. So why are we in digital education interested in data-driven approaches? Well, we can reflect on these issues and the opportunity which presents itself that we can collect this data with all kinds of devices. I mean, people have spoken in other meetings here about Industry 4.0, where you say you equip all things with sensors. And so we can collect immense amounts of data. And the objective is, can data provide us with new insights about learning, inform individual and group-based learning process, and contribute to a data-driven education for the 21st century. And then learning analytics is the same definition which Stephanie used yesterday. But I think this objective is still something where we can reflect on to which extent have we achieved this, and to which extent do we still have some ways to go. So this is just a graphical illustration of the interrelationship between the physical world and the digital world. So even 20 years ago, there were a clearer separation where you had sort of to bring things in an explicit fashion into the digital world. And lectures in university were outside of the digital environment. And what changed was that the digital world became much broader, many more things were happening inside the digital world, and also more mappings, the tight integration between the physical world and the digital world was driven forward. So if you think about what empowered Uber to become the company which it is this tight integration that there are cars out in the physical world, but all these cars are sort of operated in models in that their location and so on are all inserted in the digital world. And so there are many more things which we could talk about, but I highlighted sort of what I think maybe are topics related to the interest here, namely MOOCs, learner interactions with digital resources and learning analytics. Another question, and this was sort of came up in this relationship discussing dataism. The question is, does data provide us with insights in understanding how things are? And to which extent can we also use this data, which for me is a more interesting problem, to provide us with design inspirations and guidelines how things could or should be? And Stephanie mentioned yesterday that her attempt with the systems which they have at Michigan is not only to analyze existing courses with learning analytics, but also get inspirations how things could or should be. And so data is important, but I think there are other things like problems, ideas, which I articulated at the beginning, or some may call it visions. And Popper, who is somewhat famous philosopher, he said, knowledge does not start from perceptions or observations or the collection of data or facts, but it starts rather from problems. And I think for me this is an interesting statement to pay attention to. Now, let me just say data is important. And I, for example, play a little bit tennis, but I also like to watch tennis. And there were just the US Open, and I am amazed by the amount of data which these people collect. How high is a return over the net? Where do the people, how many serves are made to the forehand, to the backhand in the body? And this data the commentators use to illustrate points. And so there are many, many domains where I think data helps us to better understand things. And so we provide evidence instead of beliefs. We identify misconceptions. And I use the MOOCs example, where I think in the MOOCs camp, there was a huge hype about MOOCs for a number of years. I think the hype has sort of come down. And on the other side, there were these MOOCs skeptics. And so here is one point of data which particularly the MOOC skeptics used a lot, namely that only 4% of the Coursera people who watch at least one course lecture go on to complete the course. And this was used by people opposing MOOCs. Look, 4%, this is ridiculous. I mean, if I would teach a class at my university and only 4% of the students would end up at the end of the class to finish the class, I would say that would be a disaster. And I mean, there would be sort of many eyebrows raised. But if you have 10,000 students and 4% finish, it's still a substantial number. Also, for example, I signed up for a very large number of MOOCs. I did not have the intention to finish the MOOC, but I wanted to understand how people pursued, how they tried to have different ways to present a MOOC. And so I would have been also outside of these 4%. And I think this number was really misinterpreted. So my point is, we collect the number, we decontextualize it, and this leads to this misinterpretation. Now to say, you know, how data helps us to understand certain things, when MOOCs first came along, most people said, well, this is this great environment where people, you know, in Africa can listen to a lecture held in Stanford and so on. So this was the selling point, but the data which they collected at some point of time showed actually that the largest percentage of people who looked into MOOCs were people with master degrees. And I think it is important to know these numbers and say, well, how can we take this into account for thinking about MOOCs in the future and what their value might be? So I said, you know, not to be misunderstood, there is a lot of data which we can use successfully and improve things. Now, let me switch to the other side and say and argue for a few pitfalls. So they influence our behavior. And I will say in a second a little bit more about H-index orientation. They potentially reduce risk-taking. They create a potentially misleading impression of being scientific. We often use data which we kind of condense, decontextualize down to one number. So if someone has an H-index of 24, is she or he better than someone who has only an H-index of 16? If you believe or if you see the practice of hiring committees for position in the United States, there is a lot credit given to this as a measurement. And it looks scientific because 16 is smaller than 24. Again, many people think about this, and Stephanie mentioned it also yesterday from her work, that ethics and privacy policy is a big issue associated. And I like this, you know, why do we have so many free services? All the Google systems are free. And I would argue that our data is a payment for free, cheap services and contents. And particularly with personalization, again, out of curiosity, who has read the book or seen the movie The Circle? So the book is out for some time, and The Circle as a movie just came out, and I was lucky flying from Denver to Frankfurt. Lufthansa offered it as a movie, so I thought this is a good preparation coming here. And so I liked the movie, and if you are concerned about this issue, I can recommend it to watch it. So here are a few things, you know, how I, for example, as a faculty member, get evaluated, and we get evaluated in America, and part of, or a consequence of this evaluation is what kind of salary increase we get. So H-index, you know, the question then becomes, if the H-index is so important, do we now think about publishing paper where the dominant criteria is, well, what will this paper do for my H-index? And maybe that's sort of a tricky issue also to be further discussed. Then we get evaluated of number of publications, and usually it's a much easier measurement to evaluate the quantity and not the quality. We get evaluated by the research dollars and projects which we have acquired, and with faculty course questionnaire. And I will say a little bit more in a second about this. But Stephanie quoted yesterday someone whose name I didn't get. But I think it's a very interesting quote along these lines. Don't value what we measure, but measure what we value. And so these measures are all kind of easy to combine, and they provide these scientific issues. So let me give you an example of my sort of personal, evaluations. So after every course in the United States, students get a faculty course questionnaire. Whereas in standard procedure, it's a multiple choice thing, and they mark it and it gets evaluated or it gets analyzed by a computer program, and then a number comes out and you get whatever, a certain rating. So I always tried sort of to encourage the student to be a little bit more articulate. And so I ended up with a faculty course questionnaire with a bipolar distribution. So some people gave me an A, which is a good grade, and some people gave me a D or an F, which is a poor grade. And so, I tried to understand how can that be. And so I analyzed very careful their comments. And so here you see a number of comments which the students made, and I assume I labeled it negative because I don't know the direct linkage, that these students who gave me this evaluation wouldn't have given me a too high rating. So the first one is, that the student felt this was too unstructured and the advisor should become more forthcoming. And I think what's also interesting is he argues, I have been in educational setting for 15 years and probably have experienced mostly instructionist settings. And so this violated his experience. And this is a completely legitimate concern. The next one is, this relates a little bit, does the teacher know the answer? One should believe that the instructor knows at least the answer. Where my objective was to kind of convey to the student that there are problems which have no answer. But you can compare different aspects. And sometimes, the last point, we are sort of, very fond of saying, peer-to-peer learning, this is a great new thing. Well, here is a statement, I do not want to learn from my peers who know as little as I do. I want to learn from the instructor. And these are mindsets, which this is a group which probably gave me very poor grades. Now this is sort of the other end. When I signed up for this class, I had no idea what it was going to be about. Once I started to understand the material, I was extremely thrilled and interested to be be part of one of the most progressive courses on campus. I'm not sure what specifically to say, except that I ranked this class in the top 3 that I have taken at CU. And the second one relates to sort of the self-directed elements in the course. And the last sentence, I think, is interesting, where the student says that he was treated as an adult, a fact which means more to me than I can describe. So in some ways, I found this data important for me to reflect how did I earn this bipolar distribution. And what I really learned from it, and I want to relate it to this one sentence, when I signed up for the class, I had no idea what it was going to be about and what would I be graded for, or what would contribute to my grade and so on. So how I changed based on this data, I spend considerable effort at the beginning of the course to give the students an understanding that this is the nature of the course, this is what will be valued, there will be no exam, they will try to work together in teams on interesting projects. Now the question is, is this sort of, and many more people are more expert on learning analytics than I am, is this captured in any way by learning analytics types methods, or should we extend the methods in some ways to allow for feedback of this kind? Because this was really interesting feedback for me. So the other part of the name of our center was design, and I have been interested in design for a long time, and I feel the most fundamental aspect of design is that there are design trade-offs. And in the workshop which we had yesterday, sort of a summary, an attempt of a summary statement was to collect some design trade-offs which we discussed. So here is one which I want to briefly mention. So personalization, is one of the big goals facilitated by learning analytics, recommender system, and so on. So in many ways, there are lots of positive elements to support personalization. Who has heard who has not heard the concept of filter bubbles? So filter bubbles is a nice TED talk by this person. What it basically is that based on data, based on information gets filtered. And so if you buy a book by Amazon, Amazon tells you people who bought this book also bought this book, also bought these other books. An interesting experiment which is discussed in this TED Talk is, let's say one of you goes to Egypt for the purpose of spending your honeymoon there. So you studied for a few months nice hotels at the Red Sea. The other person has studied for a few months the Arabic Spring and the political developments there. And now if you type Egypt into Google, you will get very different results. And so these different results reinforce these filter bubbles. And so this is what I had as the example. And if you live in the US, there are two 24-hour TV stations. One is CNN and one is Fox News. And if you watch one or the other, you would think very differently what is going on in the world. And these filter bubbles, in my mind, we could argue, investigate whether this has led that there's much more confrontation, that there is much more willingness to search for consent and to find common ground. So I think to look into design trade-offs, which some of them we pursue with data-driven approaches like personalization, we should also reflect on, are there potential downsides? So the next thing is, I hope not too many of you, this is an immediate task for you to think about your tombstone, but if you believe in this, you can think what you want to have at a certain time marked on your tombstone for future generations to be remembered. So, to return to my basic message, again linking it with design, I like to argue that the future is not out there to be discovered, like Columbus discovered America, but it has to be invented and designed. And then the question comes up, if this is the case, who invents the future? Well, we can say, well, this is them being Silicon Valley, MOOCs companies, or our new Secretary of Education in the United States, which some people agree with and other people disagree with. One could also say by the communities which we belong to. So it's, it's the TEL community, the CSCL, CSW, and so on. Or in some ways by each of you. Meaning, if you worry about these things, how the future will be designed, then maybe you want to reflect upon this. So let me finish by saying what I sort of consider, from my point of view, a challenge for the EC-TEL community to explore different dimensions, exploring challenges, opportunities, properties of and pitfalls of this interplay between ideas about new educational design and data-driven approaches. And by doing so, maybe we can create a collective understanding of a principled, collaborative, and balanced data ecosystem to contribute and support learning in the 21st century. Thank you.